Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the 29th of October 2014. And joining me on this edition is Assistant Editor Steve Withers.
I hate a guy with a car and no sense of humour.
News Editor Mark Hodgkinson.
It's Halloween. Everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Games Editor Mark Botwright.
Don't rip my blouse.
And Audio Reviewer Ed Selly.
You fooled them, haven't you, Michael? But not me.
And welcome along to the last podcast in October in 2014. It's still slow news out there, folks. Looking for interesting things to talk about that we haven't already talked about umpteen times before, aren't we, Steve?
Yeah, a bit, Phil, a bit. This might sound a bit samey in places.
At least there's no Atmos or Oro 3D this week, folks. So let's kick things off with some of the latest competitions out there. And you need to be on your bike and very quick with this one, because Oppo's PM2 headphones competition ends today. That is Wednesday. When this podcast goes live, get on your bike if you want to win that. NVIDIA Shield gaming tablet, Mark, is that any use?
Well, I didn't review it, so I can't possibly pass comment on that.
You could trust Greg. He seemed to think it's pretty
really good.
All right, I trust Greg then. That's my endorsement.
Okay, I'm glad we sorted that out. And the other Mark, what did Greg say about this tablet?
He said it was really good. A gamer's dream. I think the Shield console was a bit of a letdown, but this tablet sort of sets it all the wrongs to right. It's very high spec, well priced, and it runs things fantastically. And there's an optional game controller to make it the gamer's dream.
And
Gamer's dream.
That's how he described it. His words, not mine.
worth buying?
That's Greg.
Well, Greg reckoned it was worth buying.
And is it worth winning?
Definitely worth winning. Anything's worth winning.
There you go, you've heard it from somebody's mouth. It's worth winning, going into the competition. And finally, just for forum members, so get signing up if you're not a member. Battlestar Galactica, the complete Blu-ray box set. Steve, this is definitely worth winning. One of the best series on TV for a long, long time. Struggling to think of anything that sci-fi that even gets close to it these days.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of the, I'd say one of the best TV shows, regardless of genre, in the last 10, 15 years. I think it was absolutely superb reboot of what was a pretty ropey series from the late 70s.
No, you've gone like a Dalek. Anybody else hear him?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dalek.
Yeah, Dalek.
Really?
Right.
Sorry,
Cylon.
boy.
Doctor Who.
Yeah.
By your command.
Eurosport winter sports season has started. Got skiing on at the moment. Bloody love watching skiing. Fucking hate skiing. But
So, what's appealing watching skiing?
well, Anna Feniger has just gone into the lead, and she is just, well, she's fantastic to watch when she skis. When she stops skiing, she is fit as a butcher's dog. I mean, what's not to like?
And what does Mrs. Selly think about this?
Mrs. Selly's more of a figure skater fan, if I'm honest, but, you know, to each their own.
Are we back, Steve?
I'm back, yeah. Do I sound
Yeah,
better?
you sound a bit better now. Yeah. Okay,
I'll do that.
so that's our competitions. Well worth entering, well worth winning. If you want the Oppo headphones, you have to be quick though. And thankfully, if you're listening to this on Wednesday, you still have time. If you're listening any other time of the week, sorry, it's gone now. Right, let's move on. Hardware news. And Steve, you went along to Panasonic's HQ last week to have a closer look at the AX902. And I guess the biggest news story here is it's not the TV they promised at CES.
No. Well, I'm not exactly sure what they were showing us at CES. Obviously, that was a prototype, but I'm very surprised when they told us on Friday that the 55 and 65-inch versions of the new AX902 are using IPS panels. Now, anyone who knows anything about panels will know that if you want really good blacks, go for a VA panel. If you want wide viewing angles, go for an IPS panel. The fact that they were claiming, better than plasma performance back at CES. I notice they aren't saying that anymore, by the way. But when they were claiming it back at CES, with a full array backlight, local dimming, 128 zones, to use an IPS panel just seems crazy. Obviously, I guess it's because they're shipping them in from the cheapest supplier, and you can guess who makes them because they're passive, the 55 and 65-inch TVs. I was very surprised at that. Given the amount of hype they put into these TVs, to use an IPS panel is very strange when you're trying to produce really deep black levels, particularly on an LCD panel. Otherwise, it's pretty much as advertised previously. The design, the shape, the build, The features are all as you'd expect from the current flagship models in Panasonic's range. It's using a quad-core processing. Certainly, the processing on board looks very impressive. The level of sophistication in terms of the smart features is very good. We didn't get a chance to hear it in terms of sound quality, so I can't comment on that. But the design, for anyone who's seen any of the 802 or the AX802, it's the same kind of design, that kind of slight tilt to the with a big heavy stand behind it that supports it. So I'm guessing this TV is going to weigh a fair bit, particularly the 85-inch version. It uses 128 zones for local dimming. I mean, they were comparing they were showing the TV next to an actual when they had a bit of black tape over the name Sony, but it was obviously a Sony Trinitron studio monitor CRT, very small, and you could see the black levels in that compared to the AX902, and clearly it wasn't as good. We did ask for the lights to be turned out at one point. And it looked okay for an LCD, but it didn't look as good as it did in the demo that we saw at CES back in January, Phil, in my opinion, although I'm basing that upon memory. And they seem to be pushing brightness more than they were black levels at this point. It was a very bright panel, they said, and you could go up to 700 nits, in fact. So it looks like they're trying to kind of slightly moving away from the super blacks and plasma performance to a bright all-round Ultra HD panel with good local dimming. Local dimming did look good, actually. They use some of the traditional tests you often see. So that sequence from Harry Potter, when everyone's amassing on the hillside with Voldemort, and there's a lot of detail in the shadows there, and it handled that pretty well, actually, compared to some of the TVs we've seen in the past. It looked pretty good. Now the big thing is, it's $3,500 for the 55-inch. It's $5,000 for the 65-inch, and $12,000 for the 85-inch, and given you can buy we'll be able to buy a 65-inch Ultra HD 4K OLED TV from LG for $6,000. Who's going to pay $5,000 for just an LCD television?
It's a big could.
Yeah, well, that's true. Assuming LG ever get the TVs out.
Yeah,
still expensive compared to, say, Samsung's Ultra HD TVs, which have been very strong this year. Or Sony, or the X9005, which is an absolutely stonking telly. That's a very toppy price point.
It is a bit disappointing on what you're saying there, Steve. IPS panel, which means it's got a restricted contrast ratio for a start. They're never strong that way. It might have that local dimming, but how is it for just out of black shadow detail? I take it's non-existent.
No, it wasn't good. You could definitely see that when you were comparing it to the CRT monitor. It was the 85-inch does use a VA panel and active shutter 3D. Obviously people would be looking at the 55, and particularly the 65-inch would have been, I think, a strong contender. And I think there'll be a lot of disappointed enthusiasts out there when they discover that it's an IPS panel and not a VA panel. Yeah,
I can only assume, and this is just us assuming and speculating, but maybe it had something to do with price. Maybe it's cheaper for them to shove an IPS panel in there than it is a VA.
I think it's definitely cheaper than to do that. I think it's definitely a price, which is surprising when they're charging $5,000 for it.
Yeah, it's inexcusable almost, isn't it? This was going to be the enthusiast TV, and then they completely ruin it all with panel choice. Bizarre, very bizarre. I think we've gone from I was going to fight you for this sample, but I have it.
There you go, Steve. You're reviewing it.
You can force it upon Mark just for a laugh.
I've yet to see a really effective dimming system in an IPS panel.
No, you're right. Actually, I tend to agree with that, Mark. I think if you want to start from a good base, don't you?
Yeah.
Before you start messing around with any dimming, you want to start from a good, decent base, and a good VA panel now can get down to 0.05.
Yeah, I've just done the AX630, haven't it? So that got down to 0.41.
Yeah.
Yeah. Panel.
That's not bad for an LCD panel, is it? That's pretty good.
It's acceptable, certainly.
And so you put in some local D on top of that, then you're starting to get some quite impressive black levels from an LCD panel. Certainly that was the case with the Sony, with the X9005. You start off with an IPS panel, it's more of a struggle. And it certainly was not as impressive a demonstration this time as it was admittedly, previously it was a prototype, and I'm pretty sure they were using a VA panel, or they claimed they weren't, but I'm positive they were. That was more impressive back at CES when they had it in a pitch black room next to a ZT. Now we were just in a normal room next to a very small CRT monitor.
Okay, so we should be getting this in for review. We're obviously not going to make our minds up until it's been in, it's been tested, it's been put through its paces in a proper living room. It's going to be Steve's living room by the sound of it. And we get to see it. We get to see it in person, and then obviously we can start making some conclusions about this product.
Yeah, I think it'll be hitting the shops in about a week or so, and review samples should also be available around about the same time. And for those of you who've got the AX802, the upgrade, well, when you're going to get Netflix 4K, that I think is released. The software upgrade is released on the 11th of November. Okay,
there you go. So that was Panasonic's announcement end of last week, and something going up on this site as well, which should be there by the time the podcast goes out. Right, so let's move on. We're talking about the quality of the panels, Steve, the quality of the TVs and so on, but it was quite surprising. You've had a projector recently that had one HDMI and then had an assortment of legacy connections, one of them being S-Video.
Yay.
We've also seen, most TVs still come with a SCART socket, RGB SCART. There are, like we say, projectors that still come with legacy connections. There are still AVRs that have all these legacy video connections, which is why, when you look at the back panel, sometimes it is a bit intimidating because of everything on there. So is it a case, Steve, that not everything has moved on to the best possible connection? And actually, is HDMI the best possible connection to use?
Well, we can save the debate on whether HDMI is a good connection or not for another time. I think that could take some time to get through. Certainly, speaking personally, I haven't used anything but HDMI for, 10 years now, is it? When did it start? When did I start using HDMI? 2005 or 6? So, 8 years maybe? Okay. I've used exclusively HDMI, I think, for all my connections. Prior to that, I had a bit of DVI and component video. And way back in the old days of Laserdisc, S-Video, but I haven't touched an S-Video connection in so long, I can't even remember when I last would have used that. I think most people nowadays generally are using, certainly for video, using HDMI. I think any product you buy now, certainly if you buy a Blu-ray player, it's only got an HDMI output. That's your only option. It would be the same with a games console now. If you've got a PS4, it's HDMI. I'm imagining most people, certainly with new equipment, it's HDMI. Then there may be people who still have things like a SCART connector knocking around, possibly. But I'm always amazed at how many legacy connections they seem to put on the back of AV receivers, given how few people I should imagine actually use. Who's using composite video? Seriously,
has anybody actually ever? Laserdisc, very early days of Laserdisc.
Very early days, yeah. But certainly, I don't think anyone. So why have they got like 5 composite video connections on when I don't think anyone uses them at all? S-Video again. There's not a product I've made in the last 5 or 6 years that will have an S-Video apart from the Optoma projector I reviewed a couple of weeks ago. Like it or whether you like HDMI or not, it is the de facto connector currently, and I don't think it's going to be changing anytime soon. So, certainly I like to see things like AVRs have lots and lots of HDMI connectors on, because I think, as we discussed last week, you can quickly accumulate quite a few devices that are using HDMI. I've got 6 in the lounge alone. A minimum of 6 inputs on AVR, really. Yeah.
So I guess the only place where you might still be using legacy is with some of the older games consoles, Mark.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. I've used S-Video in the past couple of months with an old Dreamcast. I know certainly, there were a hell of a lot of Xbox 360s, the first generation ones, that were set up in shops through composite rather than component, because it came with both on the end of the cable, and so most shops just kind of plugged them in the front of TVs and that kind of thing. So, it is a place where people might want those connections still, because kind of old consoles do tend to linger for a long time, and once they hit about kind of 12, 15 years, then they start to become more collectible once again, so people will want those. And also there are a lot of ones where, like they released VGA cables and things like that, which are rare as hen's teeth. There are certain consoles where the cables themselves to get the best possible connection are just ridiculously hard to find.
In the US, less so in Europe, it must be said, you do encounter people that have got legacy video distribution systems built into their houses. And it's essentially a means of getting the AV receiver in a limited way, because there's no bones about it. It's not like it downscales HDMI to any of these outputs or anything like that. But it's weird. I think you could get rid of a lot of these legacy collections in Europe and no one would bat an eyelid, I think you'd run into more resistance in the US and Canada, because there is an element of it still being used quite widely for sort of, secondary and tertiary requirements.
But I think in the UK, if your device has an HDMI output and input, then you're best off using it. It's simplest. It's probably going to be the best solution.
Oh no, absolutely. It has the advantage. It goes the same advantage that SCART had. One connection does picture and sound, and from a non-enthusiast perspective, that's quite welcome. The moment that you were running two separate connections from something, there was all manner of scope for someone to make a complete Horlicks of it. So, although HDMI has many failings, it does at least do that.
Yeah, for anyone who slags off HDMI, just remember the days when you had 3 connections for component video and 7 audio connections for the output on the back of your Blu-ray player, which was doing the audio decoding and sending it into your amp. 10 different cables just for one device.
Yeah, and let's not go with cable quality. That is definitely for another podcast, and that includes HDMI as well, because I think the most general bit of information you can give regarding HDMI is if it's under 5 meters and it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Don't go spending a fortune unless you want something that looks pretty. It won't affect the picture quality or sound quality, but it will last a bit longer because it's been built a bit better. And if you like to dress your rack, and Ed, it is a thing where people will dress their racks.
Yeah, not a thing here. I stress the back. Well, this current rack has only been in for a month, and it already looks like the scene with Robert De Niro in Brazil back there. So, yeah, I appreciate it. I understand it, but I don't participate in it. It's just a bit too much.
Yes,
for me.
but other people do. So,
I mean, don't get me wrong. There are certain quite clever things that certain cable companies do where they do a different finish for different cable functions, so you can at a glance just look down the back and see what's connected to what. So that there are, you don't actually need to spend a fortune. There are certain companies that do that at relatively sensible money. There are one or two aesthetic advantages, and I have to say that I'm prepared every time to spend out for connectors, be they HDMI, be they phono, be they whatever, that don't start to fall apart on me, because it's a bit different here because we're constantly plugging and disconnecting and items like that, but just the number of times that cheap plugs have either stayed connected to the unit or, more maddeningly, taken part of the unit with them. There's certain standards I don't like to fall below.
I think the whole problem when it comes to cables, why it's such a big mass debate on the forum. Sorry, I couldn't resist that.
Speaking of which, can I have some photographs of your rack, please?
Whose? Mine or his?
Ed's rack, Ed's new big rack.
I put one on the Facebook.
On the Facebook.
Yeah,
on the Facebook.
On the Facebook. Okay. So I guess a lot of the debates actually come back to the old analog days, Ed, where cables did make a difference and shielding made a difference, and being properly made, properly constructed, and so on, did make a difference when it was composite video or component video or it was analog audio. In today's world of HDMI, I think this is where you have all the confusion and why people say, oh, well, it looks better through that £50 HDMI cable than the £10. Rubbish. It can't possibly.
That's physically impossible.
It's physically impossible. It cannot do that. And magazines that review HDMI cables and say the black levels are superb and video processing was better, how the hell can a cable improve video processing and black levels? It's absolute bollocks. It is. It has to be said. But you can see where the confusion comes in, Ed, because looking back in the past, it did make a difference and cables were worth spending a little bit of money on.
Well, yes, and as I say, even if you, and don't get me wrong, plenty of people, sometimes myself to an extent, didn't necessarily buy into the promises being made of analog cables. As I say, I was always prepared to pay out for something which is just sufficiently robust to handle what I'm asking of it. And that didn't mean it was necessarily expensive. I mean, for years and years and years, my AV system down here was entirely cabled. All speaker cabling was done with QED original, because I honestly think that it will survive the end of the world. It's just utterly indestructible.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the cheaper cables that you got, it's when you go check it after 6 months, it started to turn green. That you thought, do you know what? This may not be entirely free of the impurities that they were claiming. So, it was always worth it. On two levels, it was always worth spending out for a degree of quality in terms of just general construction, fit and finish. And then, yes, depending on application, it became important. I mean, certainly, if you are a nutter involving turntables, the pitiful nature of a signal that comes out of the back of a cartridge. Trust me when I say that cable degradation makes a bit of a difference when you're dealing with 0.3 of a millivolt. So that stuff like that starts to matter.
Yeah, and, the other thing is, I don't know about yourself, but I've been to Abbey Road probably about 4 or 5 times now. I've been to Air Studios a few times, been to Galaxy Studios a few times, and we've been in these mixing areas, we've been in the recording studios, we've been in where they've mic'd things up and all the rest of it. They're using cable that's not much better than bell wire.
Yeah.
So, that's how they're recording things, and you then look at the hi-fi world and you think, well, why are you spending £5,000 on a metre of cable when the original was recorded on something that was just a little bit better than bell wire?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. The way that a lot of studios, Abbey Road is not one I'm intimately familiar with, but the way a lot of them are laid out, almost all of the important cabling is done actually preamplified because it's going to actives. So, Abbey Road's unusual in so much as it uses passive speakers. Most studios simply use good quality balanced either microphone or XLR cable.
Yeah, it's usually Channel X that are in most studios.
And then it just essentially they just get the signal in reasonable order to active speakers and sort it out from there. Yeah,
where the difference is in the mixing desk is why they still have mixing desks from the 1960s, because it has a certain sound to it. They keep certain desks or they keep certain microphones because it has a certain sound. It's got nothing to do with the cabling or anything like that. But I think we've gone too far into the cables. We said we'll come back to that in another podcast, I think, because that's possibly a full podcast just talking about cables, cable quality. It's certainly HDMI and digital signals and all that kind of thing we can come back to. But the other thing I think we need to bear
if we do that one, I need to make damn sure that we're not doing it on one of my 5-2 diet days, because there's no way I am approaching that sober. I'm sorry, not a chance.
Right, okay. Well, the other thing that we need to bear in mind when we're talking about connections, cables, is the sources. And Stevie put out an article this week about how to correctly set up the source so you are getting the best signal from it through either your AVR or straight into your display. So give us a little roundup of what you discussed in that.
Yeah, because obviously we've covered at length setting up your TV or projector to get the best picture out of it. Things like selecting movie or cinema mode, that kind of stuff. But next sort of step in the video chain is obviously your source, and you want to make sure that's set up correctly too. Ideally, what you want your source to be doing, regardless of what the source is, you want it to be outputting the signal, unmolested to the display, either in its native resolution or, if necessary, upscale to resolution to match the display you're using. So, for example, Blu-ray player. You don't want, unfortunately, there's been a bit of a trend of late where manufacturers have been putting picture controls on Blu-ray players. We do not want that. You just want the player to play what's on the disc, send it to the TV. The TV has the picture controls. That's the whole point of Picture Perfect, to use those to set the TV correctly, not on the player. And they even have, picture modes as well, which is equally distressing. So if you're not sure and your player's got one of these picture modes on that, obviously the picture controls leave them, zeroed. If they've got a picture mode and you want to know which one is the most accurate for not touching the signal, probably best thing to do is look in the reviews on AVForums, because we do test for that, don't we, Mark?
It won't be movie, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, it never is. It will usually be either
because the TVs
user or
standard or user or normal.
I don't know what it is about the word movie and manufacturers in general, because it's same for audio manufacturers. I don't remember ever having an AV amplifier where the movie sound processing mode was anything other than literally just like a sort of hilarious echo chamber. They just all sound proper bobbins. It's like a guaranteed, do not use this if you want it to sound like a movie. Unless, I don't know, maybe more cinemas outside of the ones I've been to sound like bathrooms. I don't know, but it just never struck me as natural or right.
Somebody got a washing machine that's just gone on a full cycle.
I'm afraid that is my washing machine.
I bet it's a nice washing machine though, isn't it?
I bet you it's not. It's it's a Zanussi, because I bought that back when I was impoverished and stuff. Don't get me wrong, as and when it finally explodes.
The only reason I know it's there, and finally talking about cables and interference and stuff, is because there is interference on your microphone.
Is there?
I can't hear it, but I could hear a change in pitch in your microphone there.
Because I can bloody well hear it. It's deafening. It always reminds me of that Simpsons episode with the orange juicer. It's like, I can barely hear it. It's whisper quiet.
Where were we again? Right.
Yeah, so first rule, when you're setting up your source, you want it to output the signal, whatever the device might be, in an unmolested form, as it is on the disk.
So this is another area which really confuses people and which causes debates on forums, is because manufacturers do add these picture modes and they ship the players with picture modes, and if you will look at a player side by side with another player in a shop, it is likely to look better or worse, depending on, well, let's use the words that the consumer will use, which is better or worse, depending on what they determine is better. But you will see a difference.
Yeah, and that's where there's the kind of the myth about some Blu-ray players being better than others. If you're watching a Blu-ray on a Blu-ray player via HDMI, they should all be exactly the same. If it's different, it's because the manufacturer's doing something with that signal. It's not because it's somehow better. It can't be. It's a digital signal.
Playing devil's advocate, can you at least see why, should we say, picture settings might be included on a Blu-ray player?
Yes, yes, because a manufacturer has to sell their bit of kit. It's the same as why TVs in showrooms look absolutely hideous.
No, but I mean how it might suit some people. I say you have one source for a PVR or something like that, and you want to set up. You've got a budget TV, you want to set it up so that looks great, and there are no picture settings on that, but say your TV doesn't allow for separate input, changing picture settings on each input, then you're kind of screwed across everything. So it's clearly kind of aimed at people who have to try and find some kind of a middle ground, rather than just saying, well, that's what it looks like, even though it currently looks crap because I've turned everything so that, the skybox or whatever it is looks better.
That's actually a good point, Martin. That it's something they do teach in calibration courses. That if you are in that situation where you haven't got source independent picture settings, then you might have to make some small adjustments on the player. But it's always ideal to do it on the display wherever possible.
But I guess what we're saying is find the mode which doesn't molest the signal in any way.
If you're using an AVR, again, set it to pass through. Don't be, because a lot of AVRs now also, like for example, Onkyo, have calibration controls in the AVR. Now, maybe if your TV hasn't got any calibration controls, it might be handy. But in my experience, they're pretty, not very granular in terms of the subtlety of their controls. They're fairly unsubtle, and so they're not ideal. I mean, so it would only be as a last resort, as I think Mark B just said, and Mark H. If your TV hasn't got any controls, it might be better than nothing. But generally, my advice would be, if you're using an AVR, just make sure you're passing through all your sources untouched and let the TV do all the picture processing that you want to do.
Okay, I think we've spent long enough on hardware this week. If you have any questions regarding what we've discussed, or you want to go and have a look at the articles, you can do that. Go to the front page of avforums.com. You'll find the articles there. You'll then find areas where you can comment on each article, or you've got a question for the guys on the podcast here, then put it in the podcast forum underneath this podcast, and we'll either reply in the thread or we'll raise your question next week on the podcast. So let's move on, and it's gaming news next.
Ford.
I know. Yeah.
What are we talking about here?
You just sent the link. I was talking about your rack, by the way, not that skier, but she's quite.
Yeah,
Ford.
well, I sent that through earlier. The rack link.
Yeah.
I'll have a look
Couldn't
at this.
handle the sauciness.
Oh, I was expecting the skier, not this. I've seen
There's two pictures.
I've seen that on Facebook. Oh, yeah.
James News.
Right, okay.
What are we looking at?
Yeah, it's your bit now. So, Xbox One price cut in the US. Tell us all about it.
Yep, Microsoft have announced that there's going to be $50 off, so down to $349. Which obviously, if you're squeamish, don't look at the exchange rates, because that'll make you feel even worse about what you've paid for it. If you're like me and you bought it in the UK at launch, but for about 2 months over the holiday season, so 2nd of November through to 3rd of January, it's a kind of novel idea of having an end date to a sale. You'd assume that would probably become the standard RRP. It's currently going to be US only, but it will apply to the bundles from major retailers. So it's kind of quite an aggressive policy to try and kind of slash price and reinvigorate sales. A lot of people have taken this to mean that perhaps the one isn't selling at the rates that Microsoft would like. It's been some 8 months, 9 months in a row now. The PS4 has outsold it, been the top selling console in the US. So on home turf, it's not doing that great. And worldwide, there was a recent predictive article from Ars Technica who said that, well, looking at the numbers, which obviously Microsoft kind of skirt around, that the PS4 is probably at least 40% higher in worldwide sales. It's tough because Microsoft tend to stick with words like how many consoles have been shipped, and lumping Xbox consoles all as one thing, so Xbox One and 360. They've said they've shipped 4.2 million units to retailers in the quarter ending September the 30th, which is over 100% rise, but bear in mind they did also launch it in 28 new territories. So that's, a lot of consoles going out to shops ready to be sold. So it's if you look at, say, the actual charts for games themselves, again, it seems to be the PS4 versions are selling better. So Microsoft are kind of taking things on the front foot now, and they're trying to get aggressive with their pricing. They've obviously already jettisoned Kinect, and so they've slashed the price there. And so you've also got £100 off on the UK price. So I don't know how much further they can go with the UK. I mean, you would hope that perhaps we might see it down at least maybe $299, which would, that's kind of the magic figure. A lot of people tend to look at new consoles when it gets below £300. Then that's when they seriously start thinking about it. Microsoft have kind of been around that price for a while because of various bundles, free games, that kind of thing, have lowered the price. But if you can just get the console out for $299, then I think that would be a significant step.
What is the price at the minute?
£329. It launched for £429 in the UK, but that was with the Kinect or Kinect 2.0, and that was perceived to be kind of bumping the price by about £80. So, they've gone below that. So there has been a price cut of sorts over and above. But again, it's still the question of, it's still seen by a lot of people as the kind of secondary system. It's chasing the PS4 at the moment. So in order to kind of gain parity, they've got to do something, fairly bold. And the first console that hits $299, as most of the games out are third-party games. A lot of games are now releasing with kind of parity in terms of resolution, so there's not a huge amount of difference. Some games like Destiny get exclusive content on PS4. There'll be games that come out on the one. I think the latest Call of Duty is going to have, I believe it's going to have Xbox One exclusive content. But it's I think a lot will depend on how much the new Halo Collection, Master Chief Collection actually helps shift consoles, because that's, it's a huge amount of games there. And given the fact that Destiny's kind of starting to get people a bit tired, it's not been the big new dawn that people assumed it would be, in the same way that Titanfall before it kind of tripped over itself. I think a decent first-person shooter like Halo Collection could actually, really resonate with people who are looking for something next gen, but kind of that safety blanket of games they've already played. And if you see, say, stuff like The Last of Us, stuff that even in recent times people have already played, but if it gets that little extra bit of spit and polish and brings it up, raises the resolution, and if you consider the huge bump that the original Halo and Halo 2 will get, that's going to be a huge game going into the holiday season. There are quite a few games on PS4 and Xbox One, third-party games and exclusives that have just slowly shifted further and further back in the release schedule. So if Microsoft were to do this for the UK and hit, say, $299 with the games they've got coming out, I think it could be pretty big.
Yeah. I can see why that would be a psychological price point that would definitely get people on board. Fanboys aside, is it still a case of some people buy into these consoles because of the game? They want to play the game. Is that still a big thing?
What, one game being kind of a system seller?
Yeah.
I think it is, but again, I think that tends to fall in line with the price point of a console, which is the game has to be significantly large, and most games these days are third party. But also at $299, I think things become more likely to be system sellers. At $250, again, even more so. But when you're over £300 to buy it for one game, and there's always that risk that it just won't be what you expected of it.
Yeah.
But perhaps the only game that it would still be appropriate for would be something like the Master Chief Collection, because people know exactly what they're getting from that. They're getting as much of an update, and they're getting a kind of trip down memory lane, but they're also, you're playing all the games again. All the servers will be online, so you can play your favorite multiplayer maps from, games gone by and be playing it in a decent resolution.
Yeah, it's certainly one that's piqued my interest, and if it does tip under 300, I think I see myself going Xbox One. I played all the Halos all the way through and loved them all, really. So yeah, if I can get under 300 quid, Master Chief Collection, that'll do me nicely. On the other hand, we're getting a Wii U next for Mario Kart, so that's a system seller for me.
You see, I can think of nothing I'd rather do less than play Mario Kart. It's a racing game for people that hate racing.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely perfect. Actually.
Which is me. But
I don't hate racing. I like racing very much. So the idea that some twat can fire a tortoise shell at you.
F1 would be improved with that. I'm sorry.
Blue
Well,
banana skin.
That's an argument for another day, isn't it? It's one of those things. Mario Kart is like a joke where everyone else gets the punchline except me. I just loathe it.
The world's against you, Ed.
It is. It's a conspiracy. Actually, it's not a conspiracy. They are all definitely out to get me.
So before we wrap up, Mark, anything else you need to tell us about?
Yep. We've been a little bit slack recently with various kind of, real life getting in the way, unfortunately. But
little bit slack.
Yeah. What? You want to pick something up?
Well,
Do you want to step outside? Into the virtual world? Yeah.
Yeah, if it's a virtual world, yeah.
Yeah, all right. I'll take you on in Killzone. Right. Fight like men.
Definitely beat me in Killzone.
Now, Manny's got hopefully a review of NBA 2K15. Leon says he's got a dive kick review that he says has been kind of dying to come out for quite a while. Steve will be looking at the Borderlands pre-sequel, and James hopefully will have his interview about Titan Souls coming out as well.
Excellent. So is that games news?
That is games news, and ending on a slightly more positive note.
Than the world being against Ed.
I don't know. I think that's an important message.
Be back in a sec. Okay, I can only start with one question, and hopefully he's been this week. What's at the cinema, Steve?
This week it's Fury, the new Brad Pitt Men in a Tank movie, which I've got to say was a bit disappointing. It looked quite good in the trailers. I thought a World War II action movie, very realistic, interesting cast, apart from Shia LaBeouf. And then when I got to it, it's one of those films that's lots of explosions, lots of noise, lots of action. An attempt at being realistic, although that falls down drastically towards the end when they have a big battle. It's frankly ludicrous for anyone who knows anything about actual warfare. And no real point to it. I know war's awful. But, I'd like to at least care about the characters. I mean, it very much wants to be Private Ryan. But unlike Private Ryan, where you kind of care about the men in the platoon, this squad rather, this is, you don't really like most of the blokes in the tank. And it's also so cliched. You've got the, the sort of experienced sergeant in charge. You've got the guy who's a bit of a nasty. You've got the sort of token ethnic. You've got the religious guy, and you've got the new guy, the young innocent guy who gets, corrupted by war and loses his innocence and becomes a killer by the end of this sort of thing. Very hackneyed and cliched. Some of it's really accurate. I mean, certainly the tanks, I mean, for anyone who knows anything about tanks, there's a real Tiger tank in this. No mucking about, no borrowed from Boddington Tank Museum. So that looks great. And there's a Tiger tank against 3 Shermans and 3 real Shermans too. And that scene was awesome. If you like tanks, it was great. But you just kind of felt like, what was the point of all that? It didn't tell me anything I didn't already know, and I didn't really like the people and the characters, and the ending was ludicrous. So you walked away a bit disappointed, really. Also, it's typical of any American war film now, World War II war film. Apparently, we weren't there. There's no British or Commonwealth soldiers appear at any point in this film. It's all just Americans.
I'll probably wait for the Blu-ray.
Yeah, but I would like you to see it, Ed, only to hear you hopefully rant about it.
To be honest, the idea, as you know, I don't like going to the cinema. It's got other people in it, so having to go there to see something which is only mediocre is a bit trying, if I'm honest. But we'll see.
You could have said it tanked.
Oh,
no, he doesn't.
Writes
It doesn't really
itself.
tank. He's actually doing quite well box office wise.
I know, but you use the pun at least. Doesn't matter if it's appropriate.
So yeah, 6 out of 10. It tanked.
oh, Marmite, you smell.
I don't even want to go there.
Well,
Do you only
we
have one cat called Marmite?
I have one cat called Marmite and one cat called Lily.
So you didn't call one Bovril?
I didn't name Marmite. He's my neighbour's cat, remember? He came pre-named.
So you might have had Bovril. Yeah, fair enough.
So, yeah.
Came pre-named.
Yeah. Well, you're going to mock me now, but ironically, because he's very consistently called Marmite, Marmite actually responds to the word Marmite, whereas the other cat, Lily, just responds to oi. So,
They nick food, they growl at each other a bit, and they sleep a lot.
yes,
What a lifestyle.
that's not significantly different from mine, if I'm honest, but
I was just thinking that as I said it.
I don't get
Yeah.
to sleep as much.
But do they rush at the end of the month to get everything done?
They have no concept of months.
Right, Blu-rays released next week. We've got The Hobbit, extended edition of Smog, The Fault in Our Stars and Chef, yeah. Never heard of that.
Oh, well, chef's very good. Jon Favreau, about a chef, obviously, who,
No shit.
who gets booted out, falls out with the owner of his restaurant and gets sacked, and after a bad review, and buys a truck, a food truck, and basically goes and rediscovers his what made him interested in food at the beginning, and and kind of gets rediscovered his mojo and builds his relationship up with his son. It's a really sweet movie. It's funny, it's charming, makes you quite hungry watching a lot of the food being cooked. The cast's excellent. I really, really enjoyed it, actually. I saw it at the cinema back in the summer and picked up on Blu-ray quite recently because I thought it was so good. The Fault in Our Stars is a teenager weepy. Although not bad, actually. I saw that at the cinema too. I was about the only person in the cinema who was over the age of 15. And then The Hobbit, Desolation of Smaug, extended edition, which is, believe it or not, 25 minutes longer.
Because the one thing it definitely needed to do
another
was
25
longer.
minutes, yeah. But this is the extended cut. So you also get about 5 hours of material about the making of the film, commentary tracks, etc. So if you're a fan of The Hobbit and Middle Earth movies in general, I'm sure you'll be looking forward to this. If you're not a fan, I'm sure you'd rather lick the floor of an abattoir than sit through another 25 minutes of the Hobbit movie. But clearly, this is being released now in order to prep the way for the final Hobbit film, the Battle of the Five Armies, which comes out on the 17th of December. But yeah,
Anybody interested? Apart from Steve, who has to go anyway. Anybody else interested?
I bought the 3D Blu-ray and I've still not watched it all the way through. I've only watched it for test purposes, so no, I'm not interested in another 25 minutes, thanks.
No, in a word.
Even shorter, no.
well, it wasn't even shorter, that was the same.
Well, it was the same length.
If it was going to be shorter, a bit, no.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so that's the Blu-rays coming up next week. What would be your pick, Steve?
Hobbit, I've got that coming next week.
Oh, bugger off.
Although
Right.
I've already got the chefs, which I must have got from the States because I've had it for about a month. If you're not a Hobbit fan, if you're a Hobbit fan, clearly you're going to get the Hobbit. That's obvious. If you're not, I think Chef's a great film. So yeah, check out Chef. Fantastic movie.
Right, so any of the food in Chef CGI'd, Steve?
No, it's not. And I think Jon Favreau actually had a couple of chefs, as technical advisors, and they taught him some, how to cut things up and that kind of stuff. So he looked like he knew what he was doing in the kitchen. The food in it is gorgeous. You'll be really hungry at the end of it. Having said that, if you want to see some CGI food, watch was it Attack of the Clones? I mean, Lucas is so deranged at that point that he couldn't even just put a pear on the table. He had to be a CGI pear. And it's like, come on, mate. Put a pear on a bit of string and have it levitate that way, and then take the string away with CG. That would have been easy. No, have a CG pear, which didn't even look realistic then, and looks even less realistic
CG
now.
pear of what?
as in a pear. Fruit.
Oh, a pear fruit, right? Okay.
No, they had pears in space.
Well, I think it's actually a pear, but it looks a bit like a pear. Obviously, in Star Wars, they've got things like blue milk, haven't they?
Are we really struggling for things to talk about?
Oh no! If you want to be honest, though, look at the Hobbit. The Hobbit, right? If you watched the Lord of the Rings movies, which were made over 10 years ago now, back in 1999 to 2001, in fact, so even longer than that, nearly 15 years they started shooting those. They used a combination of effects. So there was practical effects. There were some very big sets. They used what they referred to as bigatures, which were gigantic miniatures, allowing the camera to get very close with lots of detail. But they shot miniatures. And then obviously they used a degree of CG as well. And I think that's a good example of how to make a film. You don't just use CG because CG is available. You use whichever method is most effective to get the look you're trying to achieve. And I think particularly with the miniatures, for example, there was a real sense of realism to those to the sort of the castles and this kind of stuff in the film, because they were these giant miniatures and they felt they were more real.
Giant miniatures.
Yeah, they're called bigatures. They were like, these things were 30 feet high, gigantic.
Yeah,
But obviously they're representing something that's much, much bigger than that. So they are miniatures in terms of they're miniature compared to the thing they're meant to represent, but they weren't in any way miniature compared to what you consider to be a miniature. They were enormous. But, they looked really good on film. Beautifully shot. Add in some CG, people on the ramparts, that sort of stuff, and you've got yourself looking, looks great. In The Hobbit, partly because they're shooting with 3D cameras, and obviously you can't shoot miniatures with 3D cameras. It's obviously going to be a miniature. They've CGI'd all this stuff, and it just doesn't look as good. There are some of the effects in The Hobbit are very good. I think the dragon is particularly impressive, but other effects in it are well ropey, and you're kind of thinking like, how did that get past quality control? So this over dependence on CG is definitely impacting films in a way because you can achieve things. And I'm very, very pleased to see J.J. Abrams saying things like, I'm going to use practical effects where I can. I'm going to build sets. I'm going to use makeup effects, prosthetics, and not just be dependent on CG. And that's great. We don't have to just use CG. It's a tool like any other filmmaking tool. Use it when you need to, but don't just be your default option. There are other things you could do. So many other ways you can achieve effects in a film without resorting to computer-generated imagery.
Yeah, well, I mean, the big one was always Jurassic Park, and it was touted as, the first big CGI movie, but there's very, very little actual CGI
About 8
in
minutes
that movie.
in total, isn't it?
Yeah. A lot of that is practical effects. A lot of it is, the T-Rex was a full-size working animatronic. It was only certain shots there where CG was used. And the other one, which I found fascinating because I never noticed it in the movie. It wasn't until I watched the extras after watching the Blu-ray was Fight Club, just how much CGs actually Fincher uses in his films. But he uses them in such a way that you don't know it's CG that you're looking at. Yeah. Things like reflections in mirrors and subtle little camera changes and camera moves and stuff. Really, really good use of CG.
I'm sorry, the best use of CG ever is obviously the Rock when he rocks up at the end of the Mummy 2, the Scorpion King, and it looks like they just borrowed it from the PlayStation 1 game.
Yeah, that's a good example of CG that has not dated well.
It didn't. No, what do you mean dated well?
Didn't look good at the time.
Absolute bobbins on the day it came out. It was like clearly we have run out of time and money. Do the best you can. Oh, I've only got my laptop. Do the best you can. It's awful. But
conversely, I watched Jurassic Park about 3 4 weeks ago, and it stands up very well today because of the reason Phil's just said, which is that most of it's animatronic, and actually the CG is sparingly used and very well done, and it still looks good 21 years later.
Yeah, it was on ITV.
One scene's always been ruined for me though now, where I always see the hand pushing the Velociraptor tail as it goes through the door, because otherwise it's stuck and you can't unsee it. It's very annoying.
All right, I have to look out for that.
Yeah. It's during where it enters the kitchen, and the first one goes through all right, then the second one sort of momentarily stops, and then you can just see a hand push the tail and it starts to move in correctly.
Mark, being a gamer, for sake, fuck off. I don't want to buy
They
any.
always ring you at this time.
Mark, being a video gamer and watching, that kind of footage over and over and over again, does it make CG seem real?
No. in short, I'd like to say that I had perhaps a greater tolerance for it, but the problem with CG is always it's not necessarily the effect, but how it meshes with everything else.
Yeah. The one shot, and from release, and even when I see it now, Titanic, the shot where the camera goes from the front of the ship and then it rises up and it goes over the back. It's
like a helicopter shot, isn't it?
Like a helicopter sort of drone type shot where it goes over the top. And obviously everybody that's walking on the decks, it's all CG. They've all been against green screened and then really made small to look like they're walking on, and it just looks bloody awful.
Yeah, it looked pretty ropey back in '97.
Yeah,
it hasn't
totally.
got better with age.
No. And there's lots of effects in that film that when you see it now you think, oh, Jesus, that's bad.
I think bad CG can not just ruin a film. I mean, in one particular instance, it nearly ruined an entire franchise, and that is in the Die Another Day. The CG work in that when he's surfing on
unbelievably
it's
bad.
so bad that you're thinking, like, how did that ever get signed
I
off?
don't know how the people who worked on that sequence can go to sleep at night and live with themselves. It's terrible.
I mean, it nearly killed the Bond franchise. I mean, it was you kind of think, well, that's pretty bad. So do we want to watch any more Bond movies? They had to go back to the whole rebooting it with Daniel Craig, didn't they? And go back to a realistic,
almost entirely CGI-free Bond.
Yeah. And it was so much better for it.
See, I have a particular issue with one type of CG, and that's CG blood, which is there was a time where like a low-budget movie would just have like it would if it was an action film,
tomato sauce.
Well, they would spend the money on squibs and a suitable amount of tomato sauce, and there would be at least one scene where a guy would have to keep his arm up his sleeve, and they'd just like stick in some kind of weird kind of arm facsimile and just lop it off, and he'd have to go and now it's just there's so much of this kind of idea that we'll just kind of fire guns at people and then we'll put it all in afterwards, and it always looks absolutely terrible, and it just ruins things for me. Whereas like how is it that you can watch like an old spaghetti western or something with terrible kind of orange blood and somehow it just seems strangely more real?
The one that always I think that the last sort of big movie to use practical effects in that way, well, there's actually two. There was Braveheart, and the way that they did, and it was brutal the way that they did the effects, but the way that they did it, it looked so real and it looked so authentic. And the other one was Gladiator. Again, there was use of CG in that movie that hasn't stood out very well. I mean, the shot of the Colosseum in Rome, the rising camera shot that goes over it, looks terrible nowadays. But a lot of the fight sequences, a lot of the fighting and that kind of thing, it was all done with practical effects, and it's so good for it. The one in Braveheart is the one where they raise the stakes where the horses are charging, the cavalry's charging. I mean, that is, if you're a horse lover, you can't watch that because but it was all plastic horses and all the rest.
Thankfully, I hate horses, so I'd rather they used real ones. That's why Soldier Blue was so brilliant.
But you look at that, and then you look at something that's a lot more recent, where they've overused the CG, and it loses that impact. It doesn't look as real. It doesn't have that feeling of, oh my god, I cannot look at that, because you're looking at it because it doesn't look real. It looks like a computer effect.
It also has a tendency to take away from. I mean, I think we're so used to seeing like CG battles, for example. We're thinking about The Hobbit again, or Lord of the Rings. These hundreds of thousands of CG characters fighting. You see a big battle now, you think, CG. You're not awed by it in any way, shape, or form. It's not like watching the film Waterloo, where there's a shot where the camera goes over the crest of a hill with the French cavalry, and on the other side of the British squares waiting for them, soldiers in square formations, and it's all real soldiers, and you just think, fuck me. At no point have I ever said that since Jurassic Park in a movie, because you just get used to it now. You just CG.
There are some hilarious side effects, though. Do you remember when they were shooting Troy? And there was a claim that the CGI they got for that all of the people they were rendering for the battle scenes were being driven and motivated by a much more advanced form of artificial intelligence. So they didn't just move in mass; they did various things. And in actual fact, the first time that they ran the software and then just turned the intelligent levels up to a reasonable standard, all of the people involved just went, actually, this is really dangerous. So all the virtual characters ran away.
Yeah, that's true.
Which I thought was quite brilliant. But yeah, more of an unexpected side effect.
What was Michael Bassett's one with the West Country hero thing? Solomon Kane. Some of the fight sequences in that really well done. There's a bit where he chops somebody's head off, and it takes him 4 attempts to take the head off.
Like it.
You know, that's how in reality it happens. It's not like one strike and the head's off.
Talking about Fury, with the exception of all the tracer fire, the effects appeared to be at least mostly practical with the tanks, real tanks, and explosions and stuff, and all look pretty realistic and actual real world, and not too CGI heavy. Very much like the opening 20 minutes of Brian, which a lot of that was practical effects as well. So credit there, I suppose, for trying to do things. Same goes for, even though it's an awful film, Need for Speed, where a lot of it is real cars racing each other very fast. And minimal CG.
You said that, but still, I watched that on. Fair enough, it was on a plane on a 7-inch screen, but there was some times where you think, no, that wasn't done for real. That's CG, because loads of physics. There's no way a car could do that.
Yeah, well, a lot of it was done for real though, and obviously some things just too dangerous. But I think where they could, they did, and I admire them for at least trying to. I think Tarantino on Death Proof. Again, trying to do real car stunts and not just rely on CG all the time. Because there's a tendency to make filmmakers lazy, I think, because you think, it, we'll fix it in post.
Yeah, totally. There is that attitude. And the one thing that, it's a question I would love to put to modern filmmakers. If you were to remake that Bond stunt where he drives the car, the American car, upside down.
Oh, well, just the loop
over the bridge, and they did it for real.
Yeah.
They actually did that stunt for real. I mean, you look at it, it's unbelievable.
Destroyed all of their good work by using
stupid sound effect.
Yeah, totally. But it was all for real in camera. Is there any director nowadays who would even attempt to do that, or would they just do it in the computer?
How many? The thing is that there's two arguments to this. I think there's a number of directors who'd be willing to, but the sort of film, the sort of directors that would have the clearance in order to do that. Don't generally have an interest in doing that sort of thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Christopher Nolan is prone to doing unexpected things for real rather than CGI. I mean, the truck flip in The Dark Knight is all real.
Yeah.
So
he does.
He'd probably be persuaded to do it, but. The problem is that for any director that wanted to do it as a low-budget indie thing, they can't afford to do it, so they have to do CGI. The people that can afford to do it, I don't think there's any circumstance where they go, do you know what, let's loop this AMC, whatever it is. I can't remember if it's a Gremlin or something else. So, yeah, I think there's a sort of catch that most of the directors who would be given carte blanche to do it would have no interest in doing it, unfortunately.
I wonder if there are stricter rules though on what you can do as well, in terms of stunts and safety.
Not if you go to exciting countries. I was going
to say that's the thing, which is like I watch a lot of kind of like Hong Kong cinema, that kind of thing, Eastern cinema, and as the rise of, should we say, an industry that was aware of the term health and safety, you saw less and less inventive stunts because you couldn't stick a man up. Bamboo scaffolding and have him jump around, 90 feet off the ground without a safety net and say, well, it's fair enough, we've got half a dozen stuntmen and only one shot to get. Whereas these days, they are kind of going more towards CG. It does seem like, should we say, things are getting a little bit safer.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, isn't it? I think where CG's been really useful is been things like wire removal, where you've had safety features for stuntmen, that kind of stuff, where they are doing the stunt for real, but maybe they've got a wire attached so they can't kill themselves, and you can quite easily remove that. Or it's subtle effects you don't even know are effects. Changing something in the background, and
you don't get that real fun moment of. Do you remember in an 80s movie where someone would always jump off a building, and then you get to see the stuntman in a wig, or, like the shot in Blade Runner. You know.
Oh, well, they changed that. They fixed that for the director's cut, didn't they?
Did
the
they?
final cut. Yeah, they actually.
Which
got,
one?
You're talking about the bit when Zora falls through the glass, don't you? It's clearly, obviously, a
when
stunt
she
woman.
falls through the glass, and also where the Daryl Hannah character has to do the flip and then
That's the
land
bloke.
on. Yeah, exactly. It's the butcher's bloke
not so
that
much
they
Daryl
could get
Hannah,
as well.
but the Zora bit with the glass, where it's clearly obviously a woman in a wig. They actually shot Joanna Cassidy's face and put it on with CG, so it now looks like her going through the glass and not a stunt woman. Although she's still clearly not wearing high-heeled shoes in that sequence. But anyway, they didn't try and fix certain things like that in Blade Runner, which I kind of admire Ridley Scott for, actually.
Well, it's one good use of CG then.
Yeah, no, I mean, CG is very useful for lots of things, particularly suddenly, like, nowadays. But nowadays, if you've got a scene in a car, used to be you'd either be in a car on a flatbed or on a road for real, or you'd be in front of a process screen, right? And you just had the film in the background. Sometimes, often, watch any Hitchcock movie, it's really obvious. Now they green screen behind the car and they put it in, and sometimes they can do it really well. And you don't even realise it's not actually they're actually in a car. Sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes it's pretty well done, and that's fine. But where CG is overused, and we're very good at spotting something that's fake. I think the average person, because we see the real world, we know that doesn't look right. So, I mean, physics and weight and the way things move, we can see that doesn't look quite right. And when they overuse CGI, you just know it's fake. It doesn't look right, and the shark still looks fake.
Yeah, very good line there from Back to the Future 2.
Thank you.
I didn't get it.
I knew Phil would.
It's next year.
Yeah, I know. 2015 next year.
So
Shit.
we're having flying
Well,
cars.
they've invented a hoverboard now.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's it.
I don't know. It's let's face it. It's still Mr. Fusion that we're kind of all gunning for here, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the most useful one.
Yeah.
And sadly, Princess...
Or not, depending on your point of view.
Cheers, Steve. That is it for this week's AVForums podcast, and the last one for October 2014. Don't forget, we are back again next Wednesday. In the meantime, I need to thank Steve Withers.
Death has come to your little town, Sheriff.
Mark Hodgkinson.
See anything you like, exposing her breasts in brackets.
As long as you're not exposing your breast, Mark.
Mark Botwright.
It's still warm.
And Ed Selly.
More fancy talk.
Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmarkavforums.com for latest reviews, news and video. Plus, why not leave us a rating on iTunes if you enjoyed the show. I'm Phil Hinton, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.